The day I retired, everyone clapped. My boss stood up and gave a speech about loyalty and hard work. The night before, and still choke up delivering. My name engraved on the back in small, careful letters. That's how long I'd spent climbing utility poles in freezing winters, missing birthdays because somewhere across town. I never complained, not once. As I drove home that afternoon, catching the light every time I stopped at a red signal, 41 years, I smiled to myself. I didn't have to set my alarm for 4:30 in the morning. No more 12-hour shifts. Life was finally slowing down. When I pulled into my driveway, bouncing gently in the breeze, I couldn't help but smile. The front door swung open before I even reached it. My granddaughter Lily shouted, already running across the porch. I laughed. She looked up at me, eyes wide. So, I think so. Does that mean you'll come to all my soccer games now? I wouldn't miss them for the world. It's just, come on. Everybody's waiting. Duh. Music drifted from a speaker somewhere in the yard. Spatula raised like a trophy. My daughter Melissa crossed the yard and hugged me tight. 4 words, not out loud. For a moment, everything felt perfect. Almost too perfect. My co-workers shook my hand like they meant it. The kind of speech you write. Someone handed me a gold watch. 41 years, fixing lines during thunderstorms that sent everyone else running for cover. Someone else's lights had gone out. Because every hour I worked had a purpose. My family. The watch sat on the passenger seat beside me. I kept glancing at it like it might disappear. It still didn't feel real. For the first time in decades. No more aching knees on cold mornings. No more emergency calls on Christmas Eve. And honestly, I thought I'd earned it. Balloons were tied to the mailbox. A banner stretched across the garage door. Happy retirement, Dad. And maybe retirement wasn't going to be so lonely after all. Ooh, Dad's home. That she wrapped her small arms around my waist like she was afraid I'd float away. Easy there, Pumpkin One. Are you done working forever? Her whole face lit up. I knelt down, brushed a strand of hair from her face. She grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the door. The house smelled like barbecue smoke and fresh apple pie. My son David stood by the grill in an apron that read King of the BBQ. There he is. Duh, we're proud of you. Dad, but they hit harder than I expected because my kids didn't say things like that, not usually. We took photos in the backyard. Neighbors stopped by to shake my hand. My grandson Ethan challenged me to cornhole and laughed. Every single time I missed the board. Even David couldn't resist a jab. Careful, Dad. Keep losing like that and we're putting you back to work. Monday, and everyone laughed, including me. Then, after dinner, Melissa stood and tapped her glass with a fork. The whole backyard went quiet. I want to make a toast. She looked at me and her voice softened. Dad. Mom would have been so proud today. The mention of my wife, Linda, settled over the yard like a held breath. She'd passed 5 years earlier after a long fight with cancer. Not a single day had gone by that I didn't miss her. Melissa kept going. You worked your whole life so we could chase our dreams. You never asked for anything in return. We love you. My eyes stung. I looked down at my plate before anyone could see. Linda would have loved this. She always worried about what retirement would look like for me. I could still hear her voice. Promise me one thing, Robert.
What's that?
When you finally stop working, don't spend your life taking care of everyone else. Take care of yourself for once. Back then, I'd laughed it off. I honestly believed that wouldn't be hard. What father doesn't want more time with his children? What grandfather doesn't want to watch his grandkids grow up? That night, after everyone left, I sat alone on the back porch. The summer air was warm, thick with the sound of crickets. I held the retirement watch in one hand and a cooling cup of coffee in the other. And for the first time in years, I let myself dream a little. Maybe I'd finally take that fishing trip to Montana. Maybe I'd rebuild the old pickup rusting quietly in the garage. Maybe I'd volunteer down at the community center. Give some of these hours back to people who needed them. Life still had good years left in it. I was sure of that. I had no way of knowing that less than 3 weeks later, I'd be sitting in this exact same chair, wondering how I'd become a stranger inside the home I'd spent 41 years paying for. For the first time in 41 years, I woke up because sunlight touched my face. Not because an alarm clock screamed beside my bed. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee, sat on the back porch, and just listened. Birds, wind in the trees. Nothing else, no rushing, no deadlines, no emergency phone calls, just peace. Insisted on cooking dinner. David offered to mow the lawn. The kids watched movies with me every evening. Everything felt normal. Then small things started changing. Nothing dramatic. Nothing anyone else would have noticed. One morning, I walked into the kitchen looking for my favorite coffee mug. The old blue one Linda had given me on our 20th anniversary. It wasn't in the cabinet. I checked every shelf. Nothing. Karen glanced over from the sink. "Oh, I packed up a bunch of those old mugs." I frowned. Packed them. They didn't really match the kitchen anymore. She smiled politely. "I bought a new matching set." I forced a smile back. "Oh, they're nice." But inside, something felt off. It wasn't about the mug. It was what the mug meant. Linda had picked it out herself. Every morning for 20 years, I'd started my day with that cup. Now it was sitting in some cardboard box because it didn't match the color of the cabinets. A few days later, I walked into the garage, or at least what used to be my garage. Half my workbench was gone. My tool cabinets had been pushed against the wall. In the middle of the room stood a treadmill, a weight bench, exercise mats. Karen smiled when she saw my confused expression. A surprise. We turned part of the garage into a home gym. I looked around slowly. My workshop, but... "Oh, don't worry, we only moved your tools. They're all over there." She pointed toward a tiny corner. "We're 41 years of tools. That's stacked in plastic bins." I nodded. "It looks nice, Paul, but it didn't feel nice." That workshop wasn't just a place to fix things. It was where I built birdhouses with David, where Melissa learned how to use a hammer, where Linda used to bring me lemonade on hot summer afternoons. Every scratch on that wooden workbench had a memory stitched into it. Now it looked like it belonged to someone else. That evening I sat alone on the porch. For the first time since retiring, the house didn't quite feel like mine anymore. I kept telling myself, it's temporary. "Robert, they're family. Don't make a big deal out of little things." So I stayed quiet. I had no idea those little things were only the beginning. The first week of retirement felt almost unreal. Linda would have loved mornings like this. I could almost hear her teasing me. "See? I told you retirement wouldn't be so bad." I smiled without even realizing it. Some habits, though, never leave you. By 7 every morning, I'd already swept the porch, watered the flowers, organized the garage, and fixed 3 things around the house that had been broken for months. I finally had time. Time I'd never really had before. One afternoon, David stopped by. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, tie hanging loose around his neck, like he'd forgotten it was even there. "Dad, everything okay?" He sighed, the kind of sigh that carries more than words. "Not really." His apartment lease had ended unexpectedly, and the new place wouldn't be ready for another month. He and his wife Karen needed somewhere to stay. "It'll just be temporary," he added quickly. "Maybe 4 weeks. 6 at the most." I didn't even think about it. "This is your home too." His shoulders relaxed immediately. "Thanks, Dad, I really appreciate it." 2 days later, a moving truck pulled into my driveway. Boxes, furniture, suitcases, more boxes. Karen stepped out carrying shopping bags, and behind her came 12-year-old Ethan with headphones around his neck, and 8-year-old Lily dragging a pink suitcase almost bigger than she was. The house suddenly felt alive again. Honestly, I liked it. Hearing kids laugh reminded me of when David and Melissa were young. The silence after Linda passed had been the hardest part of all this. Maybe this wasn't such a bad thing. Maybe having family around would make retirement even better. The first few days went smoothly. Karen. The changes became impossible to ignore. It wasn't one big moment. It was dozens of little ones. One morning I reached for the television remote. It wasn't on the coffee table, or the side table, or anywhere in the living room. Lily smiled innocently. "Mom says Grandpa watches too many old movies." Karen laughed from the kitchen. "We've been trying to get the kids outside more." I forced a smile. "That's probably a good idea. So instead of watching an old Western, I went outside and pulled weeds from the flower beds Linda had planted years ago. The roses were still blooming, stubborn just like she always said they were. They'll keep growing, she used to tell me. As long as someone remembers to water them. I whispered, I'm still watering them, Lynn. That Friday evening, Melissa came over for dinner. At first, everything felt normal. The kids laughed. David grilled burgers, Karen made potato salad, Melissa brought dessert. Then the conversation changed. So, Dad, David said, what are your plans now? I shrugged. Haven't really thought about it. Got plenty of projects around the house. Karen exchanged a quick glance with David, almost too quick. Melissa noticed it too. What? Karen smiled. Oh, nothing. David cleared his throat. We were actually thinking, since you're retired now, you probably don't need this whole house anymore. The backyard suddenly felt quieter. Even the kids stopped talking. I looked at him. What do you mean? David leaned forward. I mean, it's a lot of house for one person. You've got 4 bedrooms, a huge garage, a big backyard. It just seems kind of unnecessary. Melissa frowned. Dad loves this house. Karen spoke before I could. We're just thinking about what's practical. No stairs, less maintenance. A retirement community might actually be safer. Retirement community? The words hit harder than I expected. I wasn't sick. I wasn't helpless. I still mowed my own lawn, fixed my own plumbing, drove my own truck. Yet somehow they were already talking as if I couldn't take care of myself. I smiled politely. I appreciate your concern, but I'm doing just fine. Nobody argued. The conversation simply moved on, but something inside me had changed. For the first time, I realized they weren't talking about my future. They were planning it. Without me? Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I walked downstairs for a glass of water. As I passed the hallway, I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Karen, David. They thought I was asleep. He'll never agree, Karen whispered. He doesn't have to right now, David said. Then a sigh. We just need more time. What if he changes his will? A long silence. Then Karen answered, quiet and flat. That's exactly why we need to do this before he has the chance. My hand froze on the hallway wall. Did I hear that correctly? Or was I imagining things? I stood there, barely breathing. Then Lily called out from upstairs, Mom! The conversation stopped instantly. Chairs scraped across the floor. I stepped back into the darkness before anyone saw me. I never got that glass of water. Instead, I lay awake until sunrise, staring at the ceiling, repeating the same sentence over and over in my mind. Before he has the chance. The question was, before I had the chance to do what? And why did it sound like they were afraid of it? For the first time since retirement, I wasn't looking forward to tomorrow. Something much bigger was happening inside my own home. And whatever it was, I was the last person they wanted to know. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. I smiled at breakfast, asked Lily how her math test went, complimented Karen on the pancakes, even joked with David about his favorite football team losing again. If they were planning something, I didn't want them to know I was paying attention. After breakfast, David grabbed his laptop bag. Heading into the office, he said. Karen kissed him on the cheek. I'll be back around 6. As soon as his truck disappeared down the street, I picked up my coffee and stepped onto the porch. I wasn't thinking about retirement anymore. I was thinking about that conversation. What if he changes his will? Those words kept echoing in my head. My phone buzzed. It was Frank. We'd worked together for almost 30 years. He'd retired 2 years before I did. Hey, old man, he laughed the second I answered. Getting bored yet? I smiled. Not exactly. You sound serious. I've got something on my mind. There was a pause. You want to grab lunch? An hour later, we were sitting in a small diner we'd been visiting since the early 1990s. Yes, the waitress didn't even ask what we wanted. She already knew. 2 cheeseburgers, 2 black coffees. Frank leaned back in his chair. All right. What's going on? I stared out the window for a moment. Then I told him everything. The workshop, the garage, the conversation, the retirement home, the whispers in the kitchen. Frank didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he folded his hands together. You know what worries me? What? You keep making excuses for them. I frowned. They're my kids. I know, but being your kids doesn't automatically make every decision they make okay. I looked down at my coffee. I just don't want to believe they'd hurt me. Frank nodded slowly. Neither did my brother. What happened? He let out a long breath. 5 years ago, my brother signed a stack of papers because his daughter said they were for tax purposes. My stomach tightened. They weren't. They transferred ownership of his cabin. He lost it. I stared at him. You're kidding? I wish I was. The waitress refilled our coffee. Neither of us touched it. Frank looked me straight in the eyes. Robert, when was the last time you looked at your will? I blinked. My will? I don't know. Maybe 8 years ago. And your house? It's still in my name. You sure? I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped. Because suddenly I wasn't sure. Not completely. Frank reached into his wallet and handed me a business card. My attorney. Best guy I know. Call him. You don't have to change anything. Just make sure you know exactly where you stand. I turned the card over in my hands. Thomas Reynolds, estate planning attorney. I slipped it into my pocket. I feel ridiculous. Frank smiled. No, you'd be ridiculous if you ignored your instincts. That afternoon, I drove past the office twice before finally parking. The building wasn't fancy. Just a small brick office with an American flag by the front door. A receptionist greeted me with a warm smile. Mr. Miller? Mr. Reynolds can see you now. The lawyer looked to be in his early 60s. Gray hair, sharp suit, calm voice. We shook hands. What can I help you with today? For the next 30 minutes, I explained everything. He listened carefully, never once interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Mr. Miller, first and nothing. You've told me proves your children are trying to do anything illegal. I nodded. I understand. But, he continued, you also have every right to understand exactly how your estate is protected. He opened a folder and typed something into his computer. A few seconds later, he smiled. Good news. The property is still entirely in your name. I quietly let out the breath I'd been holding. But there are a few things I'd recommend updating. What things? Your will, your medical power of attorney, and who can legally make decisions if something ever happens to you. I frowned. I thought all that happened automatically. He shook his head. That's one of the biggest mistakes people make. He slid a folder across the desk. Take this home. Read every page. And don't sign anything without letting me look at it first. I nodded slowly. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had someone in my corner. As I stood to leave, Thomas said something that stayed with me. Mr. Miller, protecting yourself doesn't mean you love your family any less. It simply means you're making sure no one can take advantage of that love. I thanked him, walked back to my truck, and sat behind the steering wheel for almost 10 minutes. The folder rested on the passenger seat. So did the retirement watch I'd received just weeks earlier. One reminded me of everything I'd spent my life building. The other reminded me I still had something worth protecting. I started the engine. I had no idea that when I got home, I'd find something that would make every warning Frank had given me feel painfully real. The drive home felt different. Usually I'd turn on the radio. That afternoon I drove in complete silence. Mr. Reynolds' words echoed in my mind. Don't sign anything without letting me look at it first. It sounded like simple advice, but somehow it felt like a warning. When I pulled into the driveway, David's truck was already there. That was strange. He normally didn't get home until after 6. I grabbed the folder from the passenger seat and walked toward the front door. Before I reached it, I heard voices coming from inside the kitchen. The window above the sink was cracked open. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the first sentence stopped me cold. He's getting suspicious. Karen, David answered almost immediately. Then we need to move faster. My hand froze on the doorknob. Karen lowered her voice. What if he talks to a lawyer? David chuckled. He won't. Dad trusts us. Those 4 words hit harder than I wanted to admit. Dad trusts us. He wasn't wrong. I had trusted them with everything. My money, my home, my heart. I quietly stepped back from the porch before anyone noticed me and walked around to the backyard instead. A few minutes later, I opened the sliding patio door as if I'd just returned from checking the garden. Hey, Dad, David called. You've been outside? Yeah, needed some fresh air. Karen smiled. Dinner will be ready soon. Everything looked normal, almost too normal. The smell of roast chicken filled the kitchen. Lily was coloring at the table. Ethan was playing a game on his phone. If I hadn't heard that conversation, I'd never have guessed anything was wrong. During dinner, David seemed unusually cheerful. So, Dad, I've actually got something to show you later. I looked up. Oh, nothing big. Just some paperwork. Paperwork? My stomach tightened. What kind of paperwork? He waved his fork casually. Just something the bank recommended.
Karen jumped in.
It'll make things easier in the future. I smiled politely. We'll talk about it later. David grinned. Perfect. For the rest of dinner, I barely tasted the food. Every word Mr. Reynolds had said kept replaying in my head. Around 8 o'clock, David knocked on my bedroom door. You got a minute? Sure. He walked in carrying a blue folder, exactly the kind banks use, and placed it on my desk. So, I've been talking to a financial advisor. Okay. He said it would be smart if we added my name to a few things. I looked at him. What things? You know, the house, the utilities, some accounts, just in case something ever happens. He smiled. It's only for convenience. Convenience. Funny how that word suddenly sounded dangerous. He opened the folder and slid a stack of papers toward me. Just sign here. And here. I didn't even look down. Instead, I looked at my son, the little boy who used to ride on my shoulders. The teenager I taught to drive. The young man whose college tuition I'd worked double shifts to pay. I wanted to believe him. I really did, but something inside me wouldn't let me. I gently pushed the papers back across the desk. I'd like to read them first. His smile faded. It's standard stuff. I'm sure, but I still want to read it. Karen appeared in the hallway. Everything okay? David forced another smile. Yeah, Dad just wants to look everything over. She crossed her arms. It's really nothing complicated. I nodded. Then you won't mind if I have my attorney look at it. The room went silent. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. Finally, David laughed. An attorney? Dad, don't you think that's a little extreme? I held his gaze. No, I think it's responsible. For the first time all evening, I saw something in my son's eyes I hadn't seen before. It wasn't disappointment. It wasn't frustration. It was panic, just for a second. But I saw it. He quickly gathered the papers back into the folder. Take your time, no rush. He walked out of the room without saying another word. Karen followed close behind. As soon as the bedroom door closed, I let out a slow breath. Then I reached for the folder Mr. Reynolds had given me earlier. Side by side, the two folders looked almost identical. But somehow one felt like protection. The other felt like a trap. I had a feeling tomorrow was going to answer every question I'd been afraid to ask. And deep down, I wasn't sure I was ready for those answers. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David sliding those papers across my desk. Just sign here, Dad. Simple words. But they didn't feel simple anymore. At 6 the next morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch. The neighborhood was quiet. A jogger passed by with his dog. A school bus stopped at the corner. Life around me looked completely normal. Inside my chest, it didn't feel normal at all. Around 9 o'clock, I drove back to Mr. Reynolds' office. This time, I didn't hesitate. I walked straight in with the blue folder tucked under my arm. He greeted me with a smile. Good morning, Mr. Miller. You look like you didn't get much sleep. I didn't. I placed the folder on his desk. My son wants me to sign these. Mr. Reynolds adjusted his glasses and slowly opened the folder. The room became completely silent. Page after page, he read every line carefully, highlighted several paragraphs, made a few notes. Then his expression changed. He leaned back in his chair and looked directly at me. Did anyone explain these documents to you? I shook my head. They just said they were for convenience. He slowly closed the folder. Mr. Miller, if you had signed these yesterday, your son would have gained legal ownership rights over your property. I felt every bit of color leave my face. I'm sorry, what did you just say? He turned the papers toward me. This isn't simple banking paperwork. It's a property transfer agreement. He pointed to a paragraph near the bottom. Once signed, it would have been extremely difficult to reverse. I couldn't speak. 41 years. 41 years of work reduced to a few signatures. Mr. Reynolds didn't say anything for a moment. He simply gave me time to process it. Finally, I whispered, "So they lied to me." He answered carefully, "I'm not going to tell you what their intentions were, but I will tell you this. These documents absolutely do not match the explanation they gave you." My hands started trembling. Not because of the house, because of the people asking me to sign it. My own son. Mr. Reynolds handed me a glass of water. "You have two choices. You can confront them today, or you can wait." I frowned. Wait for what? Wait to see how far they're willing to go. I sat there quietly, thinking. If I confronted David now, he'd deny everything. He'd apologize, maybe even blame the bank. No, I wanted the truth. The whole truth. Mr. Reynolds seemed to read my mind. "If you decide to wait, be careful. From this point forward, don't sign anything. And don't let them know you spoke to me." I nodded. "I won't." When I got home, the driveway was empty. David had gone to work. Karen was taking Lily to dance practice. For the first time in weeks, the house belonged to me again. I walked slowly through every room. The hallway, the kitchen, the living room. Each one held memories. There was the mark on the wall where David crashed his toy bike when he was 7. The window Linda insisted on decorating every Christmas. The old grandfather clock we'd saved nearly 2 years to buy. Every corner of this house had a story, and every story had cost me something. Time, energy, sacrifice. I wasn't angry because of the house. I was angry because somewhere along the way, my children had stopped seeing the man who built it. They only saw what they could get from it. That afternoon, I climbed into the attic. I hadn't been up there since Linda passed away. Dust covered everything. Old Christmas decorations, photo albums, boxes labeled in Linda's handwriting. One box caught my attention. Important papers. I carried it downstairs. Inside were insurance policies, tax records, mortgage statements, and a small white envelope. On the front, in Linda's handwriting, it simply said, "For Robert." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't remember ever seeing it before. My fingers rested on the edge of the envelope. For a long moment, I couldn't bring myself to open it, because somehow I knew whatever Linda had written inside was about to change everything. I thought I knew. For almost a minute, I just stared at the envelope. Linda's handwriting hadn't changed. Even after 5 years, I could recognize it instantly. Carefully, I opened it. Inside was a single folded letter. At the top, it read, "If you're reading this, sweetheart, it means I'm no longer there to remind you of something you've always forgotten." Boo! My hands began to shake. I could almost hear her voice. "Robert, you've spent your whole life protecting everyone else. Our children, our neighbors, our friends, even complete strangers. But there's one person you never learned to protect, yourself." A tear rolled down my cheek. I hadn't cried since the day we buried her. Not because I didn't miss her, but because I always believed I had to stay strong for the kids. For everyone. Linda's letter continued. "If our children ever make you feel like your kindness is something they deserve instead of something you've chosen to give, don't confuse guilt with love. Real love never asks you to disappear so someone else can be comfortable." I lowered the letter. Those words hit differently now, almost as if she'd seen this coming years ago. Then I noticed something else inside the envelope. A second piece of paper, smaller, folded. It wasn't a letter. It was a business card. Thomas Reynolds, the same attorney I'd visited just yesterday. On the back, Linda had written 6 simple words. "Promise me you'll trust him someday." I couldn't believe it. 5 years ago, before she passed away, she'd already met him. She'd already planned for the future. And somehow, she knew I'd eventually need his help. The next morning, I called Thomas. "Can you come by my office?" I found something. An hour later, I placed Linda's letter on his desk. He read it quietly. Then he smiled. "Your wife was an incredibly wise woman." "You knew her?" He nodded. "She came to see me 3 months before she passed." My heart skipped a beat. "What did she want?" He looked at me for a long moment. "She wasn't worried about herself. She was worried about you." He opened an old client folder. "She told me something I'll never forget. I kept this because she asked me to. He handed me a sealed document. Across the front were Linda's handwritten words. "Open only if Robert ever begins to doubt himself." I slowly opened it. Inside was another letter, this one much shorter. "Robert, if you're holding this, it means someone has made you question your worth. Don't. You built a beautiful life. Never let anyone convince you that the home you built or the love you gave somehow belongs to them. Love your children. Forgive them if you can, but never surrender your dignity just to keep the peace. I fell in love with a man who stood tall even when life tried to bend him. Please be that man one more time." By the time I finished reading, my vision was blurred. Thomas quietly handed me a tissue. "You know," he said, "I've been doing this job for 35 years. I've seen families torn apart over money, but I've also seen good people forget something important." "What?" "Being a parent doesn't mean you stop being a person." Those words stayed with me. When I got home that afternoon, David was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, expression serious. "Where were you?" I looked him in the eyes. "Out." "You've been gone for hours." "I had things to do." He frowned. "What kind of things?" I smiled politely. "The kind adults take care of." For a second, he looked surprised. Maybe because for the first time in weeks, I hadn't explained myself. I simply walked past him, unlocked my front door, and stepped inside. Behind me, I heard him quietly say, "Dad's acting different." Karen answered softly, "I told you he'd figure something out." I kept walking without turning around, because for the first time since retirement, they were no longer the only ones with a plan. And before this was over, they were going to learn something they'd completely forgotten. The quietest man in the room is sometimes the one you should underestimate the most. That night, I didn't confront anyone. Not David, not Karen, not even Melissa. For the first time in my life, I realized silence could be more powerful than an argument. The next morning, I woke up before everyone else. The house was still dark. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. Linda's letter rested beside my mug. I read the last sentence again. "Never surrender your dignity just to keep the peace." For 41 years, keeping the peace had become my specialty. If someone raised their voice, I'd stay quiet. If someone needed money, I'd find a way. If someone made a mistake, I'd clean it up. I'd spent so many years being the one who fixed everything that nobody noticed I was slowly breaking. Around 7 o'clock, David walked into the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator, grabbed a bottle of orange juice, then looked at me. "Morning. Morning." There was an awkward silence. Finally, he spoke. "So did you think about those papers?" I looked at him calmly. "I did." "And?" "I've decided not to sign anything." His smile disappeared. "Dad, you don't understand." "No," I interrupted gently. "I understand perfectly." He stared at me. "What does that mean?" "It means this house has been my responsibility for 41 years. I'm not handing it over because someone says it'll be more convenient." David rubbed the back of his neck. "You think we're trying to take advantage of you?" I didn't answer. Sometimes silence says enough. Later that afternoon, Melissa stopped by alone. She found me sitting in the garage, or what was left of it, sanding an old wooden birdhouse I'd built with David when he was 9. She sat beside me. "You okay?" I smiled. "I've been better." She looked around the garage. "They really changed this place." "They sure did." After a long pause, she quietly asked, "Is David pressuring you?" I looked at her. "What makes you ask that?" She sighed. "Because he called me yesterday. He wanted me to convince you to sign something." I felt my stomach tighten. He said it was just paperwork. But honestly, it didn't sound right. I nodded slowly. Because it wasn't. Melissa stayed quiet. Then she whispered, "Dad, I think they're in financial trouble." I looked up immediately. "What?" She nodded. "I wasn't supposed to tell you, but David's company hasn't been doing well. They've got credit card debt. Karen lost money in some investment, and they're months behind on several payments. Everything suddenly started making sense. The rush, the pressure, the fake concern. It was never about making my life easier. It was about saving theirs. But at what cost? My home, my security, my future." Melissa reached over and gently squeezed my hand. "I don't think David's a bad person. I think he's scared." I nodded. "So am I." That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I walked through the quiet house, past the family photos, past the staircase where Linda used to hang Christmas lights, past the living room where we'd spent countless movie nights together. I stopped in front of one picture. It showed David at 12 years old, missing his front teeth, holding the fishing rod I'd bought him after working. 16 straight days without a break. Back then, his biggest dream was catching the biggest bass in the lake. Now his biggest concern seemed to be catching my house. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I asked myself a question no parent ever wants to ask. At what point does helping your children become helping them make the wrong choices? The answer came sooner than I expected. Because the very next morning, a black SUV slowly pulled into my driveway. I didn't recognize it. A man in an expensive suit stepped out, looked at the house, then at the address on his phone, and walked straight toward my front door. When David saw him through the living room window, the color drained from his face. He whispered only 3 words. "Why is he here?" And in that moment, I knew. Whoever that man was, he wasn't here for me. He was here because of something David had been hiding from all of us. David stood frozen, his hand still resting on the living room curtain. Karen walked over beside him. "What is it?" David didn't answer. He just kept staring at the man walking up the driveway. Karen peeked through the window. The moment she saw him, her face turned pale. "Oh no," she whispered. "What is he doing here?" I looked at both of them. "You know him?" David quickly forced a smile. "No, I've seen him before." The doorbell rang, once, then again. No one moved. Finally, I walked to the front door and opened it. The man smiled politely. "Good afternoon, Mr. Robert Miller." "That's me." He extended his hand. "My name is James Whitmore. I'm with Harrison Financial Recovery Services. I apologize for showing up unannounced. I was hoping to speak with David Miller." The room behind me became completely silent. David slowly walked into the hallway. "I'm David." James nodded. "Good. I've been trying to reach you for 3 weeks." Karen immediately interrupted. "This isn't a good time." James remained calm. "I'm afraid it is." He opened a leather folder. "I'm here regarding the outstanding balance on your business loan." David swallowed hard. "I told your office I'd call." "You did," James replied. "But we haven't received a payment or a return phone call." I stood there quietly, listening, not interrupting. James continued. "The bank has rejected your refinancing request, and unless another arrangement is made, legal proceedings will begin next month." Karen crossed her arms. "This conversation should be private." James nodded respectfully. "I completely understand. But I was informed this is David's current address." David looked like he wanted the ground to open beneath him. "I'll call you tomorrow." James handed him a business card. "I sincerely hope you do." Then he turned toward me. "I'm sorry for disturbing your afternoon, Mr. Miller." I nodded politely. "No harm done." A few moments later, the SUV disappeared down the street. No one said a word. Not even Lily. The house felt heavier somehow, like everyone was waiting for someone else to speak first. Finally, I broke the silence. "Would someone like to tell me what's going on?" David rubbed both hands across his face. "It's complicated." I looked at him calmly. "No, it isn't. You're in debt." He lowered his head. Karen quietly wiped a tear from her eye. Melissa, who had just arrived to drop off a casserole, stood frozen in the doorway. "What debt?" David took a deep breath. "My business. It hasn't been doing well." "How bad?" He didn't answer. Instead, Karen whispered the number, $480,000. The room went silent. Even the ticking grandfather clock seemed louder. I stared at my son. Nearly $500,000. Now everything made sense. The pressure, the paperwork, the sudden interest in my house. It had never been about making retirement easier. It was desperation. Real desperation. I slowly pulled out a chair and sat down. Not because I was angry, because my legs suddenly felt weak. David finally looked at me, his voice cracking. "Dad, I never wanted it to happen like this." I met his eyes. "Then how did you want it to happen?" He couldn't answer. Instead, he looked away. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized something. My son wasn't acting like a villain. He was acting like a man who had spent months making one bad decision after another, until he could no longer see a way back. But that didn't excuse what he'd asked me to do. Trust, once broken, isn't repaired with excuses. It takes truth, and I had a feeling I still hadn't heard the whole truth. David stared at the floor for what felt like forever. Finally, he pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. "I owe you the truth." I nodded. "Start talking." He took a deep breath. 3 years ago, my business was doing great. We were growing fast. I hired more people, bought better equipment, signed bigger contracts. For a while, I honestly thought I'd made it. He laughed bitterly. Then everything changed. 2 of our biggest clients went bankrupt. They never paid us. I borrowed money to keep the company alive. Then I borrowed more money to pay back the first loans. Karen quietly added, "We thought things would recover. They never did." David looked at me with tears in his eyes. I was embarrassed. I didn't want anyone to know I had failed, so I kept pretending everything was fine. I listened without interrupting. I thought if I could refinance one more time, I'd fix everything. But nobody approved the loan. So, his voice cracked. So I started thinking about the house. Silence filled the room. He couldn't even look at me anymore. I convinced myself it wasn't stealing. I told myself it would stay in the family. I actually believed I'd pay everything back before you ever noticed. Karen wiped her eyes. "It was my idea to tell you it was just paperwork." David immediately looked at her. "No, this isn't on you." He turned back to me. "It was my decision. I signed the appointment. I asked Dad to sign those papers. I crossed the line. For the first time, nobody was making excuses. Nobody blamed the bank. Nobody blamed the economy. David simply admitted the truth. I looked at my son, the little boy who used to wait at the front window every evening to see my truck pull into the driveway, the teenager who cried the day his mother died, the young father who once promised me, "Dad, one day I'll take care of you the way you took care of us." Somewhere that man had gotten lost, not because he was evil, because fear had slowly replaced honesty. I stood up, walked toward the kitchen window and looked outside. Linda had planted an oak tree the year Melissa was born. 40 years later, it stood taller than the roof, strong, steady. It had survived storms because its roots were deep. Families were supposed to be the same way. I turned back around. My voice stayed calm. "David?" He slowly looked up. "I can forgive failure. I can forgive bad decisions. I can even forgive losing money." I paused. "But trying to trick your own father, that's the part that's going to take time." David lowered his head again. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me today. I'm sorry. For the first time since this nightmare started, I believed him. Not because of his words, because of the look on his face. A man who finally stopped lying, even if it was too late." No one spoke for nearly a minute. The only sound in the room was the old grandfather. Clock, tick, tick, tick. I walked over to the fireplace. On the mantel sat a framed photo of Linda, laughing, the kind of laugh that made everyone around her smile. I picked up the picture. "You know what your mother used to tell me?" David looked up slowly. "She said money can be replaced, but trust takes a lifetime to build." I gently placed the picture back where it belonged, then turned toward my family. "I've made my decision." Karen grabbed David's hand. Neither of them said a word. "I am not signing those papers." David nodded. "I understand. And tomorrow I'm meeting with my attorney." Karen's face immediately filled with fear. "Dad, please don't think we're your enemies." I looked at her calmly. "I don't. But I also can't pretend nothing happened." Silence filled the room again. Finally, I spoke the words I never imagined I'd have to say to my own son. "I think it's time you found another place to live." David closed his eyes as if he'd expected those words all along. Karen quietly began crying. Lily looked back and forth between all of us. "Mom, are we leaving Grandpa's house?" Karen couldn't answer. Instead, she hugged Lily tightly. Ethan slowly walked over to me, looking nervous. "Grandpa, did Dad do something really bad?" I knelt beside him and forced a small smile. "Your dad made a mistake. Does that mean you don't love him anymore?" That question hit harder than anything else that day. I gently placed my hand on his shoulder. "No, buddy. I'll always love your dad. Sometimes loving someone also means telling them they have to fix what they've broken." Ethan nodded. Even at 12, he understood more than most adults. The next morning, David rented a small moving truck. No arguments, no shouting, no blame, just silence. I helped carry a few boxes. Karen looked surprised. "You don't have to help." I looked at her. "I know, but I want Lily and Ethan to remember today without anger." She quietly wiped away another tear. As the last box was loaded, David walked over to me. "I don't expect forgiveness." I nodded. "You've said that already." He looked down. "But I do hope someday you'll let me earn your trust back." I studied his face. For the first time in months, I saw the son I'd raised, not the desperate man hiding behind paperwork. Just my son, broken, ashamed, trying to become honest again. I placed my hand on his shoulder. "Trust isn't given. It's earned." He nodded. "I know." Then he climbed into the truck. Lily rolled down the back window. "I'll still come to your soccer games, right, Grandpa?" I smiled. "You couldn't keep me away." She grinned. "I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart." The truck slowly pulled away. I stood in the driveway until it disappeared around the corner. For the first time in weeks, the house was quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. 6 months passed. For the first few weeks, the house felt unusually quiet. I still found myself setting out 2 coffee mugs some mornings. One for me, one for Linda. Old habits don't disappear overnight. But slowly, life found its rhythm again. I rebuilt my workshop. Every tool went back exactly where it belonged. I restored the old pickup truck I'd ignored for years. I even started volunteering at the community center, teaching teenagers basic woodworking. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just existing, I was living. Melissa visited almost every Sunday. She never came empty-handed. Sometimes it was homemade pie. Sometimes groceries. Sometimes she came with nothing at all, except a few hours to sit on the porch and talk. One afternoon, she smiled and said, "Dad, you look happier." I looked around my backyard. The roses were blooming again. Linda would have loved that. I finally remembered something. "What?" I retired from my job. "Not from my life." Melissa smiled. "I think Mom would be proud of you." I looked up at the sky. "So do I." David never stopped trying. Every month he sent me a handwritten letter. Not a text, not an email, a real letter. The first few were simple. "I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm working to pay off every dollar I owe." I read every one of them, but I never replied. Not because I hated him, because some wounds need time, not words. Then one Saturday morning there was a knock at my front door. I opened it. David was standing there alone. He looked different, older somehow, humbler. He wasn't carrying paperwork. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for the house. He was holding a small wooden birdhouse. The same design we'd built together when he was 9 years old. "I made this." He held it out with both hands. "I remembered you still had the first one." I looked at the birdhouse. The edges weren't perfect. One side was slightly crooked, just like the first one. We'd built together all those years ago. I figured maybe we could build another one together. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I stepped aside. "You'd better come in." His shoulders dropped with relief. That afternoon, we worked in the garage, just like we used to. At first, we talked about wood, paint, tools, anything except the past. Finally, David put down his hammer. I sold the business. It wasn't worth much, but I paid off part of the debt. I'm working for another company now. It's honest work. I sleep better. I nodded. Sometimes starting over isn't losing, it's growing. He smiled. "I think I finally understand that." Before he left, he stood in the driveway. "Dad, I don't know if you'll ever trust me the way you used to." I looked him in the eyes. Trust isn't like a light switch. You can't flip it back on. It's more like this old oak tree. I pointed toward the tree Linda had planted decades ago. It grows slowly, but if you take care of it, it becomes stronger than before. A tear rolled down his cheek. "I'll keep taking care of it." I know. For the first time in months, I hugged my son. Not because everything had been fixed, but because we had finally started fixing the right thing. Not the house, not the money, our family. That evening I sat alone on the back porch. The sun slowly disappeared behind the trees. I looked at Linda's old coffee mug. I'd found it in one of the storage boxes after all. It didn't match the kitchen anymore. I smiled. I didn't care. Some things aren't valuable because they look new. They're valuable because of the memories they carry. I took one last sip of coffee, looked at the house I'd spent 41 years building, and quietly whispered, "You were right, Lynn." The evening breeze gently moved through the roses, almost like an answer. And for the first time since the day I retired, I finally understood something. A home isn't protected by walls, deeds, or signatures. It's protected by the people willing to choose love over greed, honesty over comfort, and respect over entitlement. The house was still mine, but more importantly, so was my dignity. The end.